Hello everyone, welcome to Arth IAS. I am Amit Kumar. Friends, in this lecture, we are going to continue the Prelims Special Polity Crash Course. Until date, we have discussed our important topics like constitutionalism, constitution, their different dimensions, the historical background of Indian Constitution, means different acts, regulations, commissions, committee formulated by or set up by the British Parliament, right? And in this lecture, we are going to continue this series of Polity Crash Course, and today we are going to discuss very important topic, right? So today's topic is the making of Indian Constitution. After that, we will discuss the unique features of Indian Constitution, and lastly, we will discuss the criticism of Indian Constitution. Before starting this main lecture, I would like to tell you that if you have any kind of queries, any doubts regarding your preparation, you can comment in the comment box. I will personally answer your queries, doubts as soon as possible, right? Or you can mail us. The mail ID is given in the description box, right? Or at the end of this video, right? So let's start. So first we will see the making of the Indian Constitution, and under this topic we will see the making of Indian Constitution, right? How Indian Constitution was made or framed, right? So first, in 1934, very famous, as you do know, very famous and prominent leader, right? M.N. Roy, right? Put forward the idea of Constituent Assembly for India for the first time. So, idea of Constituent Assembly was put forward by whom? M.N. Roy, which year? 1934, right? Again, after that, listen. This is the chronology you should understand, and I have written this chronology or events in bullet points to save your time. So just have a quick look, right? Because it is a crash course, right? So again in 1935, the Indian National Congress (INC), Indian National Congress, for the first time officially demanded. So listen, here in 1934, M.N. Roy put forward the idea, but here in 1935, Indian National Congress for the first time officially demanded Constituent Assembly to frame Indian Constitution. Next, in 1938, Jawaharlal Nehru, on behalf of Indian National Congress, declared that Constitution for Free India must be framed without any outside interference. Outside interference means the British government should not interfere. Simple. Right? Means the Indian Constitution should be framed by the Indians only. By a Constituent Assembly elected on the basis of adult franchise. Right? Though this was not followed. Right? As you do know that the members of Constituent Assembly were partly elected, partly nominated, but it was not based on universal or adult franchise. Right? Next, this demand was accepted in principle by British government, known as August Offer in 1940. So this is very important point, that the demand of Indian National Congress, right, was officially accepted by the British government by August Offer, which year? 1940. Next, in 1942, Stafford Cripps, right? Stafford Cripps came to India with a draft proposal of Indian Constitution. Right? As you do know that Second World War had ended in till 1942. So Cripps mission, or this Stafford Cripps, this person Stafford Cripps came to India with draft proposal of Indian Constitution, which was to be adopted after Second World War. Right? And note, you should note that Cripps' proposal were subjected by the Muslim League, which wanted two autonomous, right? Two autonomous states. Two autonomous status means two different nations, India and Pakistan, and two different constituent assembly for two different countries, right? That was the demand of Muslim League. Simple. Next, finally, cabinet mission, right? cabinet mission was sent to India and it rejected the idea of two constituent assemblies. Two constituent assemblies, right? Idea was rejected by cabinet mission. And lastly, it cabinet mission put forth a scheme for the constituent assembly which more or less satisfied the Muslim League. Right? So this was the chronology before setting up of the constituent assembly. Right? Now we will see the strength, or you can see the composition of constituent assembly. Right? So you do know that in total, or simply first, that the constituent assembly was set up or constituted which year? In November 1946, and the total number of members, right, or total strength of the constituent assembly. See, I have written short, right? See, constituent assembly. So the total strength of the constituent assembly was 389 seats, right, combinedly, right. Out of 389 seats, there were 296 seats, right, 296 seats for the British India and 93 seats for princely states, right. 293 seats for British India and 93 seats for princely states. Again, among 296 seats, 292 seats were allotted to 11 governor provinces, and 4 seats were for chief commissions province. Right. Next, seats, whether it is provinces or princely states, were allotted in proportion to their respective population. Respective population means roughly one seat was allotted for 10 lakh population, whether it was princely state or British India, right. 1 seat per 10 lakh population. That was the roughly, or that was the rough distribution of seats, right. Again, seats in British India or British provinces were to be divided among 3 principal communities. That time 3 principal communities means what? Muslim, Sikh and general. General means not general caste. It included all other caste communities except Muslim and Sikh. They were included in general. Right? So this is how the seats in British India were divided among Muslim, Sikh and general category. General category included all caste communities except Muslim and Sikh. Next, the representative of each communities were to be elected by the member of that community in provincial legislative assembly. Right? Again, the representative of princely states were to be nominated by the heads of princely states. Obviously, so the members or the representatives from princely states were not elected, but they were nominated by the rulers, governors of princely states. Simple. But the representatives from British India were elected from their, or members of their people from their own community. Right? Next, that's why it quite clear that the Constituent Assembly was partly elected and partly nominated body. Right? So the question, or UPSC may frame such type of question, that the Constituent Assembly was fully elected, the Constituent Assembly was fully nominated, the Constituent Assembly or the members of Constituent Assembly were elected on the basis of adult franchising. Next, the Constituent Assembly was partly elected, partly nominated body. Take the right answer. So your answer should be that the Constituent Assembly was partly elected and partly nominated body. Simple. Next, so though this number is not important, but just for your general information, I have written here that the election for 296 seats, right, were held during July and August 1946. Right, this was the period between which, or during which, the election of Constituent Assembly 296 seats were held. And Indian National Congress got the majority, 208 out of 296 seats. Muslim League 73 seats and others only 15 seats. Right? So the main competition was between Indian National Congress and Muslim League. Right? Next, although Constituent Assembly was not directly elected by people of India based on adult franchising, right? As I told you that adult franchising was not adopted, right? The assembly had representative of all section of society, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, and others. Right? So listen, the members of take the any name of member of Constituent Assembly, you will find that they were very famous personalities. They were popular leaders among common people of India. So when it is criticized that Indian or the Constituent Assembly was not elected body, but you should remember that the people or the leaders who were the members of Constituent Assembly, they were very popular, very beloved leaders of people, and they represented people of India. Right? Again, the Constituent Assembly included all important contemporary personalities. This point is very important. All important contemporary personalities except Mahatma Gandhi and Jinnah. Right? So again, this type of question may be framed that which of the following personalities were not or did not participate in the Constituent Assembly? Options are two. For example, two other options are given and two options Gandhi and Jinnah is there. So you should pick these two persons. Gandhi and Jinnah did not participate in Constituent Assembly. Simple. Next, this is working of the Constituent Assembly. How did it work? Right? So again, have some just have a look on the chronology or events that took place in the Constituent Assembly. Right? So first, Constituent Assembly elected according to the Cabinet Mission Plan. This is also important. Next, for Undivided India met on 9th December 1946. It was the first meeting of the Constituent Assembly. First meeting of Constituent Assembly took place on 9th December 1946. And the senior most leader known as Dr. Sachidanand Sinha was its interim president. Interim president means temporary president. Right, on the same day. But what happened that after 2 days, means 2 days later, on 11th December 1946, Rajendra Prasad became president of Constituent Assembly. So who was the first president of Constituent Assembly? It was Dr. Sachidanand Sinha. But who was the permanent president of the Constituent Assembly? It was Rajendra Prasad. Simple. Again, on 13th December 1946, very important event took place. What is it? Yes, it was objective resolution. Right? It was introduced by Jawaharlal Nehru. And you would be knowing that this objective resolution laid the foundation, right, for Indian Constitution. Right? And again, the preamble, right, it laid the foundation or fundamental and philosophy of the constitutional structure, obviously. And again, one more important thing about this, that the preamble of Indian Constitution is nothing but the modified, right, the modified version of the objective resolution forms the preamble of the present constitution. Simple. And again, this objective resolution was unanimously adopted by the Constituent Assembly on 22nd January 1947, almost 40 days later. On 13th December it was introduced, and on 22nd January 1947 it was unanimously adopted, 40 days later. Right? Now, this act is very important. changes under Indian Independence Act. This act is very, very important. In the topic historical background, we have discussed this act, but here again this act is important. Why? Because gradually members of princely states and Muslim League, here Muslim League means not Muslim League or branch of Pakistan, but Muslim League branch from Indian dominions, they started to join Constituent Assembly after acceptance of Mountbatten Plan, right? And you know knowing that on 3rd June 1947, Mountbatten Plan was accepted, and it was declared that India would be divided into two nations, India and Pakistan. Simple. Again, this act means Indian Independence Act made three major changes in the Constituent Assembly's position. Right. So first, the Constituent Assembly was made a fully sovereign body. Fully sovereign body means there is no other body on or above this Constituent Assembly. It can do anything. It can frame any constitution. It can prepare any draft for the Constitution of India. It was supreme or superior, and it was declared under Indian Independence Act 1947. Right? Free to abrogate or alter any law. Alter any law means any law that existed before this date, or that was passed or framed by the British Parliament or declared by the British Crown. The Constituent Assembly of India was now supreme body or sovereign body which can declare or repeal any law. Again, two separate functions were assigned to Constituent Assemblies. Two separate functions means what? Legislative body as a legislative body and as a constituent body. Constituent body means as Constituent Assembly. Right. So when it made, right, so this body, this Constituent Assembly, listen, this Constituent Assembly had dual role. Right. It performed functions like legislative body means for interim parliament or temporary parliament, and when it made like legislative body, it was chaired by whom? G.V. Mavlankar, Ganesh Vasudev Mavlankar, and you do know that he was the first speaker of Lok Sabha. Right? And second, constituent body means Constituent Assembly, and you do know it was chaired by Dr. Rajendra Prasad. And these two bodies continued till 26th November 1949. Next, after Muslim League's withdrawal, total strength came down to 299 from 389. Obviously, when Muslim League withdrew from Constituent Assembly, right, then the total strength reduced from 389 to 299. Simple. Next, between July and October 1947, what happened? That first draft of Constitution was prepared by the Constitutional Advisor. And answer just one question, that who was the Constitutional Advisor of Constituent Assembly? Constitutional Advisor of Constituent Assembly. Right? Next, on 22nd July 1947, the Constituent Assembly adopted national flag of India, right? Tricolor flag, Tiranga, right? So again, if you don't know what happened, that UPSC has started again asking facts, directly or indirectly. So such type of statement may be given that the national flag of India was adopted on 24th January 1950, 26 January November 1949. So and this date is also given 22nd July 1947. So you should apply your logic. How or why? Because on 15th August 1947 we celebrated our Independence Day. So you should remember that on that day the Prime Minister of India hoisted the tricolor flag, and it was adopted before this date, 22nd July 1947. So using your guessing sense or logical sense, you can even answer such type of question which is not or which you don't remember. So Indian national flag was adopted on 22nd July 1949. Sorry, 47. Again, between 4th to 9th November 1948, first reading of the draft constitution, means the draft was introduced in the Constituent Assembly and the first reading took place. Right? Listen, draft is nothing, means it is not the final blue or final constitution. It simply means the blueprint of the constitution. Right? So again, the draft was introduced in the Constituent Assembly in November 1948 and first reading took place during this date, 4th to 9th November. Again, the drafting committee published the draft constitution in February 1948. So reading took place during this date and the draft was published in, for example, in official gazette of Government of India or other newspapers in February 1948. Next, on 15th November 1948 till 17th October 1948, second reading of the draft constitution took place. Second reading means what? Debates, discussion took place on the draft constitution. Next, in May 1949, the Constituent Assembly ratified India's membership of the Commonwealth. So you do know, as Constituent Assembly became the sovereign body. So there was no pressure or not mandatory to accept the membership of Commonwealth, but it was just a symbol, right? And most of the countries who were colonies of British government, right, they were a member of Commonwealth. That's why India also joined it, but its own choice. It was India's own choice, not it was pushed. Right? Again, between 14th November till 26th November 1949, the Constituent Assembly finished the third reading of the draft constitution. Third reading of draft constitution. Next, and as you do knowing that this date is very important, 26th November 1949. Why? Because on this date, Constituent Assembly passed and adopted the Constitution of India. Listen, passed and adopted, not enacted. Right? Passed and adopted means it was signed, but not enacted. It was enacted fully. Listen, though some provisions, for example, provisions related with citizenship, provisions related with election, right, they came into force from this date, but the Constitution completely came into force from 26 January 1950, and it is celebrated as Republic Day. Some of the provisions were or came into force on this day. Again, I am repeating. For example, citizenship, election related provisions, but whole constitution came into force from 26 January 1950, known as Republic Day. Next, 24 January 1950. This date is very important. Why? Three important incidents or decision took place. Right. So, what? First, Dr. Rajendra Prasad became the President of India. Right. President of India. So that you would be knowing, President could be, the Constitution came in force from 26 January 1950. On 24th January 1950, Dr. Rajendra Prasad became first President of India. Second, national anthem, national song, both were adopted on this date also. National flag was adopted on 22nd July 1947, but national song, national anthem, they were adopted on 24th January 1950. Next, here some notable points are there. So what? The Constitution was formally enacted on 26 January 1950, known as Republic Day. Next, some of the constitutional provisions, as I told you, included in Article 5 to 9 related with citizenship, 324 elections, election commission, right? 366, 367, 379, 380, 388, 391, 92, 93 came into effect on 26 November 1949. Right? And the remaining provision of the Constitution took effect on 26 January 1950, and the entire Constitution was enforced. And this is known as, this date, 26 January 1950, is known as Republic Day or celebrated as Republic Day. right? And why this date was chosen, you can comment in the comment box. Why 26 January was chosen as Republic Day? You can comment in the comment box, though it is a historical fact. Now, certain important committees and their presidents we are going to see, because there are again high chance that such committees may be asked, and there or UPSC may give you one side the committees and on the other side their president, and it can ask you to match these committees with their presidents. So just see first the committees, right, of Constituent Assembly has been categorized into two categories. First, major committees, and second, minor committees. So major committee, first we will see the major committees, then we will see minor committees. So major committees and their president. Union Powers Committee, President Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. I have written in short Pandit Nehru, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, right? Second, Union Constitution Committee. Again, it was same. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru means he was the president of Union Powers Committee and Union Constitution Committee, both. Again, Provincial Constitution Committee. It was Sardar Patel. Next, Drafting Committee. No need to tell. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Advisory Committee on Fundamental Rights. Listen, this committee's name is very long, right? So, advisory committees on fundamental rights, minorities, and tribal and excluded areas. President Sardar Patel. Next, it had following subcommittees. This committee is very important, right? Why? Because it has following subcommittees. Means there are committees under this committee, right? So, subcommittees, for example, fundamental, I have written in short, I am telling you, fundamental right subcommittee, President J.B. Kriplani. Minorities subcommittee, H.C. Mukherjee. Northeast Frontier Tribal Areas and Assam Excluded and Partially Excluded Areas Subcommittee, Gopinath Bardoloi, right? Gopinath Bardoloi. Again, Excluded and Partially Excluded Areas Subcommittee, A.B. Thakkar. Next, Rules Procedure Committee, Dr. Rajendra Prasad. States Committee for Negotiating with States, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Steering Committee, Dr. Rajendra Prasad. So here we have seen that 3 committees were headed by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, 2 committees were headed by Dr. Rajendra Prasad, known as Rules Procedure Committee and Steering Committee, right? Again, now we will see the minor committees. Minor committees on the functions of the Constituent Assembly. G.V. Mavlankar. This person, as I told you, he was the first speaker of Lok Sabha, right? Orders of Business Committee, Dr. K.M. Munshi. House Committee, B. Pattabi Sita Ramaiya. Ad hoc Committee on National Flag, again Dr. Rajendra Prasad. And a special committee to examine the draft constitution, Alladi Krishna Swamy Iyer. Right? Now, drafting committee and their members, very important. Right? You should remember all the members, including the chairman of this committee. Very important. So, this committee, right, may be important, but at least you should remember that it was set up in August 1947. Exact date 29th August 1947. On this date, this committee, means drafting committee, was set up. It has 7 members, including chairman. Right? So, most important committee of the Constituent Assembly. It has 7 members, including chairman. And you do know chairman? Obviously, yes, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Right? So, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, chairman. Other members, Sayyid Muhammad Shadullah, N. Madhav Rao, N. Gopala Swamy Iyengar, Alladi Krishna Swamy Iyer, T.T. Krishnam Chari. right? And lastly, Dr. K.M. Munshi, right? All these 7 members, including chairman, were from drafting committee. Here, you should note important things that majority of the provinces, right? Majority of the provisions, sorry, majority of the provisions of the constitution have been adopted by consensus. Consensus means what? Acceptance from the members, the consent, consensus, right? After lot of deliberation, lot of debates, lot of discussion, but accepted or adopted by consensus, their acceptance, right? Though they had debates, they had arguments, but lastly they came to the final conclusion. Why? Because they love India and people of India, and their only intention or the noble intention was to make India great. I'm giving it the most strongest constitution, most beautiful constitution, and see, till date we have the most strongest constitution. though for though for some provisions there had been voting, right? In case of extreme, or in extreme cases, right, there was provisions for voting, right? And lastly, provisions were adopted after exhaustive debates, right? Now we will move towards the next. Now, criticism of constituent assembly. Why constituent assembly is criticized, right? So first, not a fully representative body. Why? Because not fully representative body means from princely states the representatives were nominated by the governors or rulers of princely states, right? Universal adult franchise was not used, right? Next, dominated by INC, Indian National Congress. So but you do knowing that the members or the Congress was India and India was Congress that time. All the leaders were loved, respected, right? Loved and respected by the people of India. Again, not a sovereign body. Though we have seen that Indian Independence Act declared Constituent Assembly as a sovereign body, but sometimes it is criticized, right? But you should say that no, it was, when it is asked even in interview or even in the question, you should conclude that no, Constituent Assembly was a fully sovereign body. Why? Because even Indian Independence Act made it or declared it the sovereign body, and it could repeal, right, or abolish any law, right? And no superior body above it was there. Again, slow in its work, obviously slow, but to frame a constitution for a huge population and diversified population like India was not an easy task. It was a tough nut to crack, right? That's why it took place. And tell me one thing, what was the exact time that took, or that was taken by the Constituent Assembly to frame the constitution? What was the exact time? Next, dominated by Hindus, right? This is criticized, but you should know that in a country where majority of the population is Hindu, so how could you expect, or it is very common to have majority population or majority members from this community. Though members from, as we seen in the previous slides, so that members from each and every community were represented. Even women members were there, but there were, or their numbers were less. But in spite of that, representatives from each and every section were there. Next, dominated by lawyers and politicians. Listen, to frame a constitution is not a layman's function. It requires expertise. So it is quite common that lawyers and politicians should involve in framing of constitution. Take example of any other country. They were means constitution of any other country were framed by democrats. Politicians, bureaucrats, statesmen. So what is uncommon with India? It is quite common, right? Now, challenges. challenges before or in front of Constituent Assembly. Right? So, certain challenges, listen, you can see there were wounds of division, right, of a country into two states. Right? There were mass killings. Again, there were challenges to integrate the princely states. So there were so many challenges in front of the Constituent Assembly. So first, lack of representation and legitimacy. Right? Lack of representation and legitimacy means what? Representation, it is said, as I told you, that sometimes people from different sections were not involved. For example, number of female members or women members in the Constituent Assembly were very less. Because that time in India, you can imagine, at the time of independence, what was the literacy rate? Forget about educated people. Literacy rate, it was very low, even less than 20%. People were literate. Right? Demands from Muslims for minority is separate electorate. It was another challenge. Again, princely states. As I told you, princely states, it was, they were also creating challenge. But thanks to and great respect or and honor for our great visionary leader like Sardar Patel, who done this job very well. He integrated the princely states very nicely. Right? Next, arriving at consensus over different ideologies. Obviously, when people from different communities, different caste, different origin are member in the same Constituent Assembly, it is not an easy task to include or incorporate any provision. There were debates, right, clashes, right. So, and again, ideological differences. Ideological differences, for example, some suggested Gandhian philosophy, some suggested leftist approach, some suggested rightist approach, and some suggested communist approach. Right? But as you do know, that Indian Constitution is more inclined, right, more inclined towards Gandhian philosophy. Like for example, socialism in India is not Marxist socialism, but Gandhian socialism. Again, partition of country into two states. This created one of the, you can say, or the biggest challenge in front of the Constituent Assembly. Division of rights or powers between states and central government. Obviously, this was also a challenge because especially princely states were not ready to compromise or surrender their own rights. Problems of SCs, STs, and other depressed classes. Also, this was one of the challenge in front of Constituent Assembly. Right. So this was all about the making of the Indian Constitution. Right. Now we will move to a very important topic, that is unique feature of Indian Constitution. Listen, why I have used the term unique. Your even standard books use the term salient feature, but I have used unique features of Indian Constitution. Right? What I have done, that you first see the lecture, right? See these points, then you will find the difference between your standard books, what you have read till date, and what I am going to teach. I have included very unique features that is not mentioned in most of the standard books. Right? That's why I have used the term unique features of Indian Constitution. Right? From different international scholars, what they have said or they have written in their books about Indian Constitution. This is you should know. The salient feature given in your standard books is very generalist feature, very generalist, not unique or specialist feature of Indian Constitution. Right? So see, I have included 17 unique features of Indian Constitution. Though some of them match with your standard books, but most of them vary. Right? Have been quoted by the international scholars. So first, Indian Constitution is a living constitution. Right? Who says? Mark Tushnet, a scholar. Right? You can search his name or Google his name. You would be knowing who is it. Right? So first he says Indian Constitution is a living constitution or living document, organic document. Why? Because what is the common characteristic of a living organism? To change over the period of time. Right? So again, in the same manner, Indian Constitution is a living document or living constitution. Why? Because it has ability to change as per the demand of society and people. Right? For example, till date we have made 106 amendments in our constitution. Judiciary has pronounced several judgments, several it and which led to inclusion of several provisions. For example, several doctrines, doctrine of basic structure, right to privacy. All these have been propounded by the or held by the judiciary, Supreme Court. Right? This is how the Indian Constitution has evolved. Right? Next, so Indian Constitution has evolved dynamically through amendments, judicial interpretations, especially via judicial review and PILs. Obviously, I gave you the examples. Right? For example, Vishakha guidelines. Right? Evolved or came only because of PIL. Right? Judicial or doctrine of basic structure, right to privacy. All these things came. Even right to marry of one's own choice. Right? So this is how Indian Constitution has evolved. Next, a transformative constitution. Transformative constitution. Professor Upendra Bakshi, very famous name. Especially if you are from political science background, you would be knowing this person's name. Though he is Indian, but he is internationally recognized. And he says that Indian Constitution is a transformative constitution. Do not listen. Do not mix these two terms: living constitution and transformative constitution. Living means what? It has ability to change, evolve. But transformative constitution means what? Transformation means what? Changing its own form. Right? So it says he calls the constitution a tool for social transformation, and empowerment of the marginalized. For example, social transformation means what? Best example, Sabrimala case. Right? The Supreme Court allowed the entry of women in the temple, Sabrimala temple. So what is it? It is a social transformation, and it could happen, right, only because of this transformative constitution, which allows the judiciary or even parliament to transform certain provisions. Whom? For the social transformation and empowerment of the marginalized. So woman is what? Marginalized section. Generally weaker section, it is considered as weaker section. Right? Reservation policies. Next, the constitution as a tool for social revolution. So Granville Austin, very famous name, right? And if you have time, right, you can read his book, Indian Constitution, the Cornerstone of Nation. Very famous book, very fine book. If you have time, not now, do not touch this book before prelims. Okay, do not touch. But if you are preparing or you are going to attempt next year, you can read that book. Very good book. So he says the Indian Constitution is first and foremost a social document. Right? Social document. Why social document? Because majority of its provisions are aimed at furthering the goals of the social revolution. Obviously. For example, DPSPs, certain fundamental rights are nothing but what? They allows the weaker section, right? Or allows social revolution in the society. Next, unique blend of legal continuity and revolutionary changes. So, as you would be knowing, that Indian constitution had retained many legal institutions from British rule but has adopted democratic legitimacy. Right? So adopted institutions from British rule. For example, so many Indian constitution has incorporated exactly 250 provisions from Government of India Act. Certain institutions that were set up by British government continued even after independence, even after adoption of the constitution. For example, Reserve Bank of India continued till date or not. So it is a legal continuity and evolutionary change. Right? We have continued certain provisions. Right? For example, parliamentary system of government, we have continued. Right? But also made or we have done revolutionary changes as per the demands, requirements of the society and people of India. Now we will see next point, that it says a remarkable legal document without parallel in democratic world. Granville Austin. Right? So simply he means to say that no constitution like India exists in any democratic world. Right? How? He says, or Granville Austin called the Indian Constitution a seamless web of three key strands. Right? Three key strands means Indian Constitution, or as a democratic constitution, it has three key strands, three key features. What? Democracy. Right? Obviously, India is a democratic country. Right? Second, social revolution. Obviously, and lastly, national unity. Listen, India is a diversified country, and what happened that only one thing that makes us or raise it, you can say, create sense of belongingness is our constitution. One India, one constitution. Rest we have different languages, different cultures, different customs, right? But in spite of that, we are one because of one constitution. So three key strands are of Indian constitution is democracy, social revolution, and national unity. Right? Even preamble talks or the constitution talks about unity and integrity of India. Right? Next, he admired means Granville Austin admired how it combines means Indian constitution combines justiciable rights with non-justiciable directive principles. Obviously, we have fundamental rights which is justiciable in nature, means these fundamental rights can be enforced, right, by the court of law. Right, the aggrieved person or the victim can knock the door of judiciary in case of violation of fundamental rights. On the other hand, we have non-justiciable directive principles, right, and it acts as a philosophy, as a guidelines for the states while framing any law, plans, policy, whatever. Right, creating a balance between law and morality. Obviously, so fundamental rights help, fundamental rights and DPSP both help to maintain or balance, create a balance between law and morality. Right. Next, lengthiest and most detailed constitution in the world. This is very general feature. Right. Even all the standard books talks about this feature, that it is the, or even most of them starts with this feature, that lengthiest document in the world. Right. Lengthiest constitution in the world. So lengthiest and most detailed constitution in the world. Obviously, it was obvious. Why? Because the same or we have one constitution and it includes both the provisions of the central government and state governments. Right? Again, combination of rigidity and flexibility. Again, very general features. Some of the provisions of Indian constitution, as you would be knowing, that rigid or flexible constitution means what? If the constitutional provisions can be amended by simple majority just like any ordinary law, it is considered as flexible constitution. If its provision are or requires special majority for amendment, then it is considered as rigid constitution. For example, USA. But India is a perfect, or Indian constitution is a perfect blend of flexibility and rigidity. Next, federalism in form but unitary in spirit. Again, it is not a very unique feature. Right? So, unique feature, why? Listen. Most of the countries are whether federal or unitary. For example, Britain, unitary constitution. America, federal constitution. But India, again, it has federalism, but the constitution does not mention the, or nowhere includes the term federalism. In spite of that, it has federal features, but it has unitary bias or unitary in spirit. Unitary in spirit means what? It is inclined towards the center. There are certain provisions which are exclusively for the central government. Right? For example, just an example. For example, printing currency notes. Right? Making coins exclusively in the hands of central government. Making international treaties, signing any international agreement exclusively in the hands of central government. Right? And again, here I would like to tell you that both the center and state, right? The center and states in India derive their power from constitution originally because of federalism, and the center acts like big brother because of unitary spirit of Indian constitution, not as a father, because the constitution is supreme. Neither the central government nor the, or how could the state government could be the supreme. Right? Next, amalgamation of world's best constitutional practices. Right? Again, very famous personality says Sir Ivor Jennings. You must have heard his name. So he says that it is, our Indian constitution has or is amalgamation, right, of best practices of constitutions. Best practices, for example, what he emphasized, Indian constitution is not indigenous in narrow sense, but a synthesis of global models. Global models means we have adopted. Listen, when it is criticized that Indian constitution is a borrowed constitution, that time Dr. B.R. Ambedkar said that if anything, right, or any constitution has some good values, good features, there is nothing wrong to copy that provision, right, because these are universal values, and no country, no state, no constitution has copyright or you can say monopoly over universal values. Anyone could adopt, right? So for example, we have adopted certain good provisions, right? For example, parliamentary system of UK, right? Parliamentary system from UK, federalism from USA, directive principles from Ireland. Again, certain principles like for our provisions, for example, fundamental rights, also from USA, right? Socialist principles from Russia, right? Again, an example of constitutional nationalism, right? Constitutional nationalism, and who said it? Carl Frederick, right? So he says, according to him, Constitution of India creates a national identity. As I told you, no, that only one thing that makes us or creates a sense of belongingness or sense of oneness, sense of unity is our constitution. In spite of that, we have different languages, different culture, different food habits, a different attire, different clothes. In spite of that, we have sense of unity. Why? Because of constitution. And that's why Carl Frederick called Indian constitution as an example of constitutional nationalism. Means this constitution creates sense of nationalism, right? And according to him, Constitution of India creates a national identity out of diversity, showing constitutional patriotism rather than ethnic nationalism, right? Next, again, Carl Frederick says a sovereign constitution enacted by the people of India themselves. Obviously, the preamble says we the people of India, right? So we the people of India means what? This constitution has been framed by the people of India, and the ultimate power lies in the hands of people of India, not even the constitution. We have given ourselves to the constitution. It is a social contract, right? So people are sovereign. So he says, he emphasized that the right, he emphasized what, that the nature of Indian constitution, meaning it was not granted by the people through the constituent assembly, right? This makes it one of the most legitimate and democratically founded constitutions in post-colonial society. Simple. So simply it means what? This constitution was enacted by people of India themselves, not any other external power or any other alien government. Right? Next, directive principles as a moral compass. Right? Moral compass. Even in the previous features we have discussed that it acts, directive principle acts as a moral compass. Moral compass for whom? For the states. That while framing certain laws, plans, policies, scheme, they should consider these principles. That's why its name is what? Directive principle of state policy. Right? These principles act as guidelines. Right? So DPSPs are rare and moral approach to guide governance, creating a unique blend of enforceable laws, aspirational values. Right? So this creates enforceable laws. Any law which is going to be enforced should consider DPSPs, because it acts like a moral compass, acts like guidelines, acts like philosophy. Next, India's constitution has embedded secularism through pluralism. If we compare the secularism of India with Western secularism, we find it different from Western secularism, because in or you can take example of France or USA, they have complete separation. Secularism means complete separation between the church and the state, means religion and state. But in India, states can intervene, right, in the religious affairs. So again, Indian secularism is not about church-state separation, just like for example France or USA, but what? But it has unique feature. Unique feature means I told you that state's intervention is allowed. There is no complete separation between religion and state. Right? For example, religious intervention led to ban on triple talaq. Right? This is how. For example, if any religion has certain ill practice, the government or state can intervene, and it can abolish such type of practices. Right? Next, judicial creativity in post-colonial democracy. Judicial creativity means what? We have adopted parliamentary system with a strong judiciary. And what happened that after independence, judiciary has propounded or held certain provisions, or it has propounded certain doctrines. For example, doctrine of basic structure. Right? It has given or introduced provisions like PIL. Right? So this this is known as judicial creativity. Judicial activism is what? Nothing but judicial creativity. PIL, what is it? Nothing but judicial creativity. So Indian judiciary's innovative jurisprudence, particularly the basic structure doctrine, which is a creative constitutional solution, not seen elsewhere. Right? Generally, in rest of the countries, judiciary, although they also have innovative or creative judiciary, but India or Indian judiciary is known for its own creativity. For example, I told you PIL, judicial activism, right? PIL is an example of judicial activism. Certain doctrines, certain rights, for example, right to privacy, was held by the Supreme Court as fundamental right under Article 21. Right? Again, an experimental model for parliamentary federalism. Parliamentary federalism. Parliamentary federalism means, for example, we have adopted parliamentary system of Britain, but in Britain, it is not federalism. Right? It is unitary form of government. But in India, we have adopted federalism. Right? And at both the levels, means at union level and at state level, both have their own legislature. But in Britain, there is not. But there is central government or union government which gives power to the provincial governments. But in India, the states derive their power originally from the constitution. So it is in India, it is known as parliamentary federalism. Right? India is a successful example of federalism in a deeply divided society, combining centripetal institutions like president, prime minister, or Supreme Court, SC, Supreme Court, right, with federal units. Simple. Next, reflection of post-colonial aspiration for justice. Right. So the Indian Constitution provided a framework for justice, rights, and identity for a newly independent, diverse, and stratified society. Simple. No need to explain. Right. Again, it sought to modernize society through legal means, which is rare in any other constitution. Modernize society. Right. So modernized society means, for example, certain provisions have been introduced, right, or amendments have been done in the Indian Constitution, or even the judiciary upheld. For example, judiciary decriminalized article section 377 of IPC. So what is it? It is one of the symbol of modernized society, right? Again, massive attention to minority rights. Yes, in a country with majority population from different section, it has also considered the minority rights. It has not ignored, rather it has paid attention to the minority rights, right? And this is one of the best unique feature of Indian Constitution, that it has massive attention to massive attention to minority rights. The Indian Constitution proactively protects minority rights and religious, linguistic, right, and cultural, whatever. Minority, which kind of, whether it is linguistic minority, religious minority, or cultural minority, right? And something many countries fail to embed so clearly in their foundational document. Foundational document means constitution. Most of the countries have failed to recognize or pay attention towards the minority rights. Their major focus on majority. So these all were, right, all these were the very unique features of Indian Constitution. And I would suggest that you should note these unique features. Right? You can write these unique features in your means examination. And you will not find such features in any standard books. Right? Now, lastly, we will move towards the criticism of Indian Constitution. And again, I have included certain very unique criticism. Right? Though some of them match with your standard books, but just read, you will find. Right? And after that, we will end our lecture. So we have included 9 points in the criticism of Indian Constitution. Right? So first, it is said that an elitist document, Rajiv Bhargav, right? You must have heard the name, very famous name, especially if you are from political science background. You must have heard the name, Rajiv Bhargav, though Indian but internationally recognized scholar. Right? So he says that Indian Constitution is or an elitist document. Why elitist document? He said that the Constitution was largely framed by elite urban men. This, right? you can say that this is statement to some extent is correct, that mostly the members of constituent assembly were elite or from elite urban class, right? They were, whether they were western educated, they belong to elite class, they were politicians, they were lawyers, right? And what, with limited grassroots participation. Grassroots participation means people from lower section of society, though few examples are there, but mostly they were from elite urban class. Next, and what was result? Result was alienation of tribal, rural and dalit voices in early years, right? Next, too long and complex. Yes, this is very general criticism, that it is too long and complex, right? Till date it has almost 470 articles, right? Tell me in the comment box how many parts and schedules are there in the Indian constitution. I have told you the till date around it has 470 articles, but tell me the exact number of parts and schedules in the Indian constitution in the comment box, right? So DD Basu, again you would be knowing, very famous personality, right? So he says that it's excessive, it means Indian constitution's excessive detail makes it more of a legal code than a guiding framework, obviously. So each and everything has been, or a detailed explanation or provision has been given regarding most of the provisions, right? Though judiciary is to interpret the constitution, but most of the provisions have been explained by the constitution, right? Even for the state level. Next, so the constitution often gets into procedural and administrative specifics, which should ideally be left to laws or conventions. Means the provisions which could be left for laws, laws means other acts that could be passed by the parliament later, or conventions have been even written in the constitution itself, that make it bulky or too long, right? Next, legalism over political philosophy. So legalism means it is more inclined towards the legal philosophy or legal provisions rather than political philosophy, right? It has detailed legal provisions rather than political provisions or political philosophy. For example, the Indian constitution focuses more on legal architecture than developing a clear political identity, right? For example, it is not very clear about which kind of socialism or democratic or whatever, right? All these political ideologies, mostly it focuses on legal provisions, right? Next, too centralized too centralized for a federal constitution. Who says it? KC Weir. So too centralized means what? Though India has adopted the concept of federalism, but it is inclined towards the central government or center, right? That's why it is said that it is too or very centralized, in spite of that having or being a federal constitution. How? He argued, means KC Weir argued that Indian constitution does not truly reflect federalism. Does not truly reflect federalism. For example, take example of USA. States and center both are completely independent within their own sphere. But in India, there is overlap, or more powers are in the hands of the center. So it is criticized that it lacks true concept of federalism. Next, India has federal form but unitary spirit. Obviously, unitary spirit, more power lies in the hands of central government. For example, uh, defense related, foreign affairs related, or monetary related policies are or can be framed only by the central government. Next, no clear theory of separation of powers. Obviously, as per A.V. Dicey, right? Very famous name. Rule of law, you do know, right? When you have read Article 14, you have read about that person, A.V. Dicey, right? So he says that there is no clear theory of separation of power. Why? Because in India, we have, though we have separation of power, right? I hope it, here I would like to say separation of power, but legislature and executive have an overlap, right? And here is judiciary. Means executive is always part of legislature. The judiciary is separate, but no complete separation. Why? Because executive have intervention in judiciary, judiciary has interference in legislature, so no complete separation, right? No complete separation of power. The Constitution of India does not fully ensure separation of power, especially between executive and legislature. As I told you, there is overlap between executive and legislature. Right? For example, Article 123. What is it? Ordinance making power of president. Right? So here executive, president is what? Part of executive. So he is allowed to make laws under Article 123. Passing ordinance, promulgating ordinance. Next, undemocratic nature of emergency provisions. Yes, this is criticized. And you do know the year 75 to 77, it was misused, right? And even till date, it is criticized. Right? So this emergency provision is called as or considered as what undemocratic provision, right? And for a temporary period, right, like a temporary dictatorship, right? It allows for a temporary dictatorship while being formally legal. Though it is legal, but it allows for a temporary dictatorship. Again, next, contradiction between fundamental rights and directive principle of state policies. Obviously, several times we have several examples, several case laws. Okay, due to paucity of time, I am not discussing the case laws here. Right. So, non-justiciable directive principles lead to their neglect, right? And especially their social and economic aspects. And again, this creates a tension between individual liberties and social welfare. Obviously, fundamental rights are related with individual liberties, and directive principles are related with social welfare. Directive principles try to establish a welfare state related with social welfare. Fundamental rights are related with individual, right? They try to ensure individual liberties, right? Next, weakness of judicial appointments process. Right, weakness of judicial appointment process means absence of democratic transparency in appointing judges through the collegium system. Obviously, means judges are, in simple terms, you should remember that judges are not appointed by the people. Judges are not accountable towards the people. So, this is called weakness of judicial appointment process. Right, and sometimes it leads to corruption among or inside judiciary. Right. This concern is often compared with Senate hearing in the US for Supreme Court judges. And last, criticism of Indian Constitution. Secularism in India is ambiguous. Though Indian secularism is unique feature, but it is ambiguous. Why ambiguous? Means not clear. Because Indian secularism lacks the strict separation of religion and state found in Western model. Right? And what happened? That Indian secularism permits the state intervention in religion, which could lead to the selective intervention. Obviously, there is intervention or interference of state in the religious affairs. So there is ambiguity in Indian secularism. Right. So these were all about the criticism of Indian Constitution. So in this lecture, we have discussed very important topics in very detail, right? And I hope all these topics will help you in upcoming prelims. Till then, we will meet in another lecture. Thank you for watching.